My son sold our family home, gave his wife $660K to blow, then moved back in with us. I thought I knew my son. After 32 years of raising him, loving him, and watching him grow into what I believed was a responsible man, I thought there were no surprises left. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And the day he knocked on my door with 2 suitcases and tears in his eyes, I realized that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of breaking us in ways we never saw coming. My name is Denise Washington. I'm 55 years old. And this is the story of how my son destroyed our family legacy in less than 6 months, and why I'm still trying to figure out if I should forgive him or cut him out of my life forever. Chapter 1. The Foundation We Built. Let me start at the beginning because you need to understand what that house meant to our family. It wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was our American dream made manifest, brick by brick, payment by payment. I was 19 when I married Jerome Washington in 1987. We were young, broke, and madly in love, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Oakland that barely had working plumbing. Jerome worked double shifts at the shipyard while I cleaned offices downtown, both of us scraping together every penny we could find. We had a dream that seemed impossible for 2 black kids from the wrong side of the tracks. We wanted to own our own home. Back then, getting a mortgage wasn't easy for people who looked like us. Banks had their ways of making you feel unwelcome, of finding reasons why your credit wasn't quite good enough, why your income wasn't quite stable enough. But Jerome had this quiet determination that I'd never seen in anyone else. He'd come home exhausted, coveralls stained with grease and sweat. But he'd still sit at our tiny kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, figuring out how to save another $20 here, another $50 there. "D," he'd say, using the nickname he'd given me on our second date, "we're going to get that house. I don't care how long it takes." It took us 4 years. 4 years of eating ramen noodles and generic cereal, of walking instead of taking the bus, of saying no to movies and dinners out while our friends lived their lives. 4 years of Jerome working weekends and me taking on extra cleaning jobs until my hands were raw from chemicals and my back ached constantly. But in 1991, we finally had enough for a down payment on a small 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood in Richmond. I still remember the day we got the keys. Jerome picked me up and spun me around right there on the front porch, while our realtor, a kind older black woman who'd fought the same battles we had, smiled and wiped her eyes. "This is it, baby," Jerome whispered in my ear. "This is our foundation." He was right. That house became everything to us. We painted every room ourselves, staying up until midnight on weekdays to get it done. We planted a garden in the backyard where Jerome grew tomatoes and collard greens that tasted better than anything you could buy in stores. We built a wooden deck where we'd sit on summer evenings, watching the sunset and planning our future. And when Marcus was born in 1992, that house became even more sacred. His first steps were across our living room floor. His height was marked in pencil on the doorframe of his bedroom. His birthday parties filled our backyard with laughter and chaos. Every memory that mattered was housed within those walls. Jerome used to joke that the house was like a 4th family member. "She takes care of us," he'd say, patting the wall affectionately when something needed fixing. "And we take care of her." We did take care of her. Every tax refund went into improvements. New windows in 1998. A renovated kitchen in 2003, a new roof after the storms of 2006. We never saw these as expenses. They were investments in our legacy, in something we could pass down to Marcus. The house appreciated steadily over the years, but we never thought about selling. This wasn't a commodity to us, it was home. It was proof that we'd made it, that we'd overcome the odds stacked against us. It was security for our future and Marcus's inheritance. When Jerome had his heart attack in 2015, the house held us together. During those terrible weeks in the hospital, then the months of recovery, our home was our sanctuary. The mortgage was almost paid off by then, just 3 more years of payments, and knowing we had that stability helped us focus on Jerome's health instead of worrying about where we'd live. Marcus was 23 then, working his first job out of college and living in San Francisco. He'd come home on weekends to help with his father's care, and I'd catch him sometimes just standing in the living room, looking around with this expression I couldn't quite read. "You okay, baby?" I'd ask. "Just thinking about all the memories in this place," he'd say. "All the history." I thought he understood. I thought he felt the same connection to our home that Jerome and I did. I was so wrong. Chapter 2. The Perfect Son. Or so I thought. Marcus had always been what you'd call a good kid. Not perfect, no child is, but the kind of son that made other parents envious when they heard about his accomplishments. He was smart, ambitious, and charming in a way that opened doors for him everywhere he went. In high school, he played varsity basketball and maintained a 3.8 GPA. He was student body treasurer his senior year and got accepted to UC Berkeley with a partial academic scholarship. Jerome and I were so proud we could barely contain ourselves. Our son was going to have opportunities we'd only dreamed of. College suited Marcus well. He majored in business administration and minored in economics, graduating magna cum laude in 2014. He had internships at respected companies, a network of successful friends, and job offers waiting for him before he even walked across that graduation stage. The tech boom in San Francisco was perfectly timed for Marcus's entry into the workforce. He landed a position as a financial analyst at a startup that got bought out by Google within 2 years. Suddenly, my son was making more money at 25 than Jerome and I had made combined at that age. He moved into a sleek apartment in Soma, started wearing expensive suits, and driving a BMW that cost more than our house payment for an entire year. But he never forgot where he came from. He'd still come home for Sunday dinners, still helped Jerome with yard work, still called me every few days just to check in. "My successful son," I'd brag to my friends at church, "works for Google now, you know." The pride I felt was intoxicating. Here was this young black man who'd navigated every obstacle, who'd succeeded in spaces where people like him weren't always welcome, who was living proof that our sacrifices had been worth it. When Marcus started dating Ashley in 2018, I was cautiously optimistic. She was white, blonde, and from what Marcus described as old money, her family had been wealthy for generations. The kind of wealth that came with trust funds and summer homes and connections that opened doors before you even knocked. I'll admit, I had my concerns. Not about her race. Jerome and I had raised Marcus to see people as individuals, but about the cultural differences. Ashley had grown up with a level of privilege that was completely foreign to our experience. She'd never worried about money, never had to fight for opportunities, never had to prove she belonged somewhere. But Marcus seemed happy, and that's what mattered to me. When they got engaged in 2019, Ashley was polite and friendly during our interactions, even if there was always a certain distance there. She'd compliment my cooking, but barely touch her plate. She'd ask about my work, but her eyes would glaze over when I answered. "She's just different from us," Jerome said diplomatically after their first visit to the house. "Comes from a different world." "As long as she makes Marcus happy," I replied, though something in my gut felt unsettled. Their wedding in 2020 was, well, it was everything Ashley had dreamed of and nothing like what I would have chosen for my son. It was held at her family's country club in Marin County, a lavish affair with more flowers than I'd ever seen in one place, and a price tag that could have paid off our mortgage twice over. Ashley's family paid for everything, which should have been a blessing, but somehow felt like a message. We can afford what you cannot. We can give your son things you never could. Marcus looked handsome in his custom tuxedo, and when he looked at Ashley walking down that impossibly long aisle, his face lit up with pure joy. That's what I held on to, that happiness, that love. Maybe they could bridge their different worlds through their commitment to each other. After the wedding, they bought a beautiful house in Mill Valley, close to Ashley's parents but a world away from Richmond. Marcus would joke that their mortgage payment was more than most people's salary. But the way he said it, with a mixture of pride and disbelief, told me he was still the same kid who remembered when $20 was a big deal. "We're building our own foundation now, Mom," he told me when they moved in. "Just like you and Dad taught me." I should have paid more attention to the way Ashley looked when he said that. Should have noticed how her smile never quite reached her eyes when Marcus talked about the lessons Jerome and I had taught him. Should have seen the signs that she didn't just come from a different world, she actively looked down on ours. But I was just so proud of my son's success, so grateful that he'd found love and prosperity, that I missed all the warning signs. I missed the way Ashley would roll her eyes when Marcus mentioned his childhood. I missed how she'd change the subject whenever he talked about his plans to take care of Jerome and me as we got older. I missed the growing tension between them that Marcus was working so hard to hide. Most of all, I missed the moment when my son started valuing Ashley's approval more than his own principles, when keeping his wife happy became more important than honoring the people who'd raised him. If I'd been paying closer attention, maybe I could have seen the disaster coming. Maybe I could have saved our family home. Maybe I could have saved my son from making the biggest mistake of his life. But I wasn't paying attention. I was just a proud mother, trusting that the values Jerome and I had instilled in Marcus would guide him through whatever challenges married life might bring. I was so naive. Chapter 3. The cracks begin to show. The first sign that something was wrong came in early 2022, though I didn't recognize it as a warning at the time. Marcus and Ashley had been married almost 2 years, and their visits to Richmond had become increasingly rare and increasingly tense. "We can't make it to Sunday dinner this week," became Marcus's regular refrain. "Ashley has a thing with her family," or "We've got plans in the city," or simply, "We're just really busy right now, Mom." When they did visit, the dynamic felt different. Ashley would spend most of the time on her phone, responding to texts or scrolling through social media. She'd make polite conversation, but always seemed to be looking for an escape route. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed like he was walking on eggshells. He'd glance at Ashley before answering simple questions, as if he needed her permission to speak. The easy confidence he'd always had was replaced by a nervous energy that made me want to pull him aside and ask what was really going on. "Everything okay with you two?" I asked him one Sunday after Ashley had spent the entire afternoon texting instead of engaging with the family. "Yeah, Mom, everything's fine," Marcus said, but his smile was forced. "Ashley's just dealing with some stress at work." Ashley worked part-time as an interior designer, mostly for friends of her mother's who wanted their already perfect homes made even more perfect. It didn't seem like the kind of job that would create much stress, but I kept my thoughts to myself. The second warning sign was financial, though again, I didn't understand what I was seeing at the time. Marcus had always been generous, picking up dinner tabs, bringing nice gifts when he visited, sending flowers for my birthday. But suddenly, he seemed almost obsessive about money. "Mom, how much are you and Dad spending on groceries these days?" he asked during one of our phone calls. "I don't know, baby. Maybe $150 a week. Why?" "That seems like a lot. Are you sure you're getting the best deals? Maybe you should try shopping at Costco. Buying in bulk." This from the son who just bought a $80,000 BMW and lived in a house with monthly payments higher than most people's annual salaries. When I mentioned this to Jerome, he frowned. "Since when does Marcus worry about our grocery budget?" he asked. "Maybe he's just looking out for us," I said, but even as I said it, something felt off. The third sign was the most telling, but I completely missed its significance. Marcus started asking questions about our house, questions that seemed innocent enough, but, in retrospect, were clearly leading somewhere. "Mom, do you ever think about downsizing?" he asked during a visit in spring 2022. "This house is pretty big for just you and Dad now." "Downsize? Baby, this is our home. We're not going anywhere." I know. I just meant, for when you get older. Stairs might get harder. Maintenance might be more challenging. Your father and I aren't dead yet, Marcus, I said with a laugh. We can handle some stairs. But he kept bringing it up. How much was our homeowner's insurance? Had we had the house appraised recently? Did we know what it might be worth in today's market? I'm just trying to help you guys plan for the future, he'd say whenever I questioned his sudden interest in our finances and living situation. I should have seen what was coming. Should have recognized that these weren't the questions of a concerned son. They were the questions of someone doing reconnaissance. But Marcus was my baby. The child Jerome and I had sacrificed everything for. The idea that he might be scheming against us was literally unthinkable. The fourth warning sign was Ashley's behavior, which went from politely distant to actively hostile. During what would turn out to be their last visit to our house in June 2022, she barely spoke to Jerome and me at all. When she did speak, it was to make little cutting remarks disguised as innocent observations. "This neighborhood has really changed," she said, looking out our front window at the house across the street where the Martinez family had lived for 15 years. I'd barely recognize it from when Marcus was growing up. "Change isn't always bad," Jerome replied mildly. "The Martinez kids are good kids. Roberto's starting college in the fall." "Oh, I'm sure they're fine," Ashley said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just different." Later, when I was serving dessert, a peach cobbler that had always been Marcus's favorite, Ashley pushed her plate away after one small bite. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Washington. I'm just not much of a dessert person anymore. Trying to watch my figure, you know?" The implication hung in the air, unlike some people. I felt self-conscious in a way I hadn't since I was a teenager, suddenly aware of my own fuller figure, my own love for the comfort foods I'd grown up with. Marcus didn't defend the cobbler he'd always loved. He didn't defend his mother who'd spent the afternoon making his favorite dessert. He just nodded sympathetically at his wife and said, "Yeah, we're both trying to eat healthier these days." That night, after they'd left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the barely touched cobbler and feeling like a stranger in my own home. "Something's not right with that boy," Jerome said, joining me at the table. "He's not acting like himself." "Maybe marriage changes people," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Not like this," Jerome replied. "Not this much." We were both quiet for a moment, lost in our own thoughts. "You don't think—" Jerome started, then stopped. "Think what?" "You don't think he's ashamed of us, do you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Ashamed? Of the parents who'd loved him unconditionally, who'd sacrificed everything for his success, who'd built the foundation that allowed him to reach such heights. "No," I said firmly. "Marcus would never. He's just adjusting to married life." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Had I seen shame in his eyes when Ashley made her cutting remarks? Had I noticed him cringe slightly when I served the cobbler in mismatched bowls instead of the matching china Ashley probably used for everything? Had my son, the boy I'd raised to be proud of where he came from, learned to see us through his wife's privileged eyes? Had he started to view our modest home, our working-class background, our simple pleasures as embarrassments to be hidden rather than foundations to be celebrated? I pushed the thoughts away. This was Marcus we were talking about. My son, the boy who used to sit in the same kitchen doing homework while I cooked dinner, who used to help Jerome fix things around the house, who used to bring his college friends home and proudly introduce them to his parents. People don't change that drastically. Love doesn't just disappear. I was wrong about that too. Chapter 4. The Betrayal. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in August 2022. I was in the garden tending to Jerome's tomato plants. He'd been having some mobility issues and couldn't get down on his knees like he used to, when I heard the landline ringing through the open kitchen window. "Mom." Marcus's voice sounded strange. Strained. "Are you sitting down?" "What's wrong, baby? Are you hurt? Is Ashley okay?" "We're fine, Mom, but I need to talk to you and Dad about something. Something important." Jerome was in his chair in the living room reading the morning paper. I motioned for him to come into the kitchen, then put the phone on speaker. "We're both here, son. What is it?" There was a long pause. So long that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Marcus, you there?" "Yeah, I'm here. This is really hard to say." Another pause. My heart started beating faster. When your child calls and says something is hard to say, your mind immediately goes to the worst places: cancer, divorce, financial ruin, death. I never imagined it would be betrayal. "I sold the house," Marcus said, the words coming out in a rush. "Our house." "Your house." "I sold it." The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. "What do you mean you sold the house?" Jerome's voice was very quiet, very controlled. I had power of attorney, remember? You gave it to me when Dad was in the hospital after his heart attack in case something happened and you couldn't make decisions. I never canceled it. The power of attorney. Yes, we'd given it to him during those terrifying days when Jerome was in intensive care, and we didn't know if he'd survive. It was supposed to be temporary, just in case. We'd never formally revoked it because Marcus was our son, because we trusted him completely. "But why?" I whispered. "Why would you sell our home?" "Ashley and I, we're in some financial trouble. Her business hasn't been doing well, and we've been living beyond our means. The mortgage on our place in Mill Valley is killing us, and we owe money on credit cards, and—" "So you sold our house?" Jerome's voice was rising now. "Without even telling us." "I was going to tell you. I was going to discuss it with you first. But then Ashley said the market was really hot, and if we waited, we might lose the opportunity. And the buyer was offering cash, above asking price." I couldn't breathe. Literally could not catch my breath. This had to be a nightmare. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely audible, "this is our home. This is where we live. This is our security, our retirement, your inheritance. How could you just sell it?" "I know, Mom. I know how this sounds. But listen, we got $660,000 for it. Way more than you guys ever imagined it was worth. And I'm going to take care of you. Ashley and I talked about it, and we want you and Dad to come live with us in Mill Valley. You'll have your own space, your own entrance." Jerome was standing now, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. "Live with you? In Ashley's house? As what, charity cases?" "It's not like that, Dad. We're family. This solves everyone's problems. You guys don't have to worry about maintenance or property taxes or any of that stuff anymore. Ashley's already talking about how to convert the guest house for you guys. It could be really nice." The guest house. They wanted us to live in the guest house like hired help, like elderly relatives to be hidden away and managed. "Where's the money, Marcus?" I asked. "The $660,000. Where is it?" Another pause. Shorter this time, but somehow more ominous. "Well, we used some of it to pay off our debts, and Ashley had some ideas about investments, some opportunities her family knows about. How much is left, son?" It's complicated. "Mom, the investments are kind of tied up right now, but Ashley says—" "How much is left?" Not much. Right now. But this is a temporary situation. The investments are going to pay off big, and then you guys will have way more than the original $660,000. Ashley's dad knows what he's doing with this stuff." I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs no longer able to support me. Jerome was pacing now, his hands clenched into fists. "Let me get this straight," Jerome said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You sold our house without our knowledge or consent. You gave $660,000, money that belonged to us, to your wife to gamble with. And now you want us to be grateful for the privilege of living in your guest house, like we're your elderly pets. Dad, it's not like that." "What is it like then?" Jerome exploded. "What is it like, Marcus? because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you stole our home and our future to bail yourself out of debt and fund your wife's shopping sprees. The investments are legitimate, Dad. Ashley's family has been doing this kind of thing for generations. They know how to make money work. Then why didn't they use their own money? I asked quietly. Silence. Marcus, why didn't Ashley's family use their own money for these amazing investment opportunities? They have other priorities right now. Translation. Ashley's family was too smart to risk their own money on whatever scheme they'd convinced my naive son to fund with our life savings. When do we have to be out? Jerome asked. The closing is in 30 days, but like I said, you guys can move in with us immediately. Ashley's already planning. Jerome hung up the phone. We sat in that kitchen in complete silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The kitchen where we'd eaten thousands of meals, where Marcus had done his homework, where Jerome and I had planned our budget and our dreams and our future, all of it gone, sold out from under us by the child we'd trusted most. Finally, Jerome spoke. 32 years, he said. 32 years we sacrificed for that boy, and this is how he repays us. I couldn't respond. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what had just happened. Our home, the symbol of everything we'd worked for, everything we'd achieved, everything we'd planned to leave behind, was gone. Sold by our own son to fund his wife's fantasies and clean up their financial mess. And the worst part? He actually seemed to believe he'd done us a favor. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The next 30 days were the hardest of my life, and that's saying something for a woman who's buried both her parents, survived her husband's heart attack, and lived through decades of financial struggle. Jerome barely spoke to me during those weeks, not out of anger at me, but because he was processing a betrayal so profound that words seemed inadequate. He'd sit in his chair for hours, staring out the window at the garden he'd tended for over 30 years, at the deck he'd built with his own hands, at the neighborhood where we'd raised our son. I threw myself into the practical details of moving because if I stopped moving, I'd have to think about what was really happening, and I wasn't ready for that kind of pain. Marcus called several times during those weeks, each conversation more painful than the last. He seemed genuinely confused by our anger, as if he couldn't understand why we weren't grateful for his solution to our housing situation. "Mom, you're being really unfair," he said during one particularly awful conversation. "I'm trying to take care of you guys. Do you know how many people would love to live in Mill Valley? Do you know what properties go for out here?" We didn't ask to live in Mill Valley, Marcus. We asked to keep living in our own home. But this is better. You'll be close to us and you won't have to worry about anything. Ashley's already picked out paint colors for the guest house. The guest house. He kept calling it that, as if the name somehow made the situation more palatable. As if being relegated to a converted garage on his property was a step up from owning our own home. "What about our neighbors?" I asked. "What about our church? What about Jerome's doctors? What about the life we've built here?" "You can make new friends." There are churches in Mill Valley, too, and the healthcare out here is probably better anyway. It was like talking to a stranger. This person who sounded like my son but seemed incapable of understanding that a life isn't something you can just pack up and relocate without losing essential pieces of yourself. The most heartbreaking conversation happened about 2 weeks before we had to move out. Marcus called to discuss logistics, his tone businesslike and efficient. "I've hired movers for next Saturday," he said. "They'll pack everything up and bring it to the guest house. Ashley measured the space. And obviously, you guys will need to downsize pretty significantly. There's a great donation center in Marin where we can take the stuff that doesn't fit." "Downsize?" I repeated. "Well, yeah. The guest house is only about 600 square feet. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, small living area. You won't need most of your furniture. 600 square feet for 2 people who'd lived in a 1,400 square foot house for over 30 years. We'd have to get rid of the dining room table where we'd eaten every meal, where Marcus had done his homework, where Jerome and I had paid bills and planned our future. We'd have to get rid of most of our books, our photo albums, the quilt my grandmother had made, the china we'd saved for special occasions. We'd have to get rid of our life and squeeze what remained into a space smaller than our current living room. "What about Dad's workshop in the garage?" I asked. Jerome had set up a small woodworking area where he repaired things around the house and built furniture for neighbors. "There's no room for that stuff, Mom, but he probably doesn't need a workshop anymore anyway, right? I mean, at his age. Jerome was 57 years old, not 97. He was dealing with some heart issues, but he was still capable, still creative, still needed purpose in his life. But to Marcus, apparently, being in your 50s meant being ready for the scrap heap. "I have to go," I said, and hung up before he could respond. That night, I found Jerome in his workshop, running his hands over the workbench he'd built 20 years earlier. 37 years of marriage, he said without looking up. "You think you know someone after 37 years. "We raised a good boy," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Whatever happened to him, we raised a good boy." Did we, though? Maybe we spoiled him. Maybe we made it too easy for him. Maybe we should have let him struggle more, made him understand the value of what we were giving him. I didn't have an answer for that. Had we failed somehow? Had we been so focused on giving Marcus opportunities we'd never had that we forgot to teach him to respect the sacrifices that made those opportunities possible? The worst part of those final weeks was the isolation. We couldn't bring ourselves to tell our neighbors what was happening. The shame was too overwhelming. How do you explain that your own son sold your house without your knowledge? How do you admit that the child you're most proud of has betrayed you in the most fundamental way possible? Our friends at church noticed that we seemed distracted, stressed, but when they asked if everything was okay, I'd just smile and say we were dealing with some family matters. The truth was too humiliating to share. 3 days before we had to move out, Ashley called. Not Marcus, Ashley. "Mrs. Washington, I wanted to talk to you about the guest house setup. I've been shopping for furniture that would work in the space, and I found some really cute pieces that would be perfect for you guys. We have furniture, Ashley." "Oh, I know, but most of it won't fit, and frankly, it's a little dated. I thought this would be a good opportunity for a fresh start, more modern, more streamlined, more like what Ashley considered appropriate for the kind of people we were. Not the heavy, comfortable furniture we'd saved for and chosen carefully over the years, but cheap, disposable pieces that matched Ashley's vision of what elderly dependents should have. "We'll make do with our own things," I said. "But Mrs. Washington, I really think you'd be happier with a more cohesive look. I have such a good eye for this kind of thing, and I just want you to feel comfortable in your new space. Your new space. Not your new home, not even the guest house. Your new space, like we were being allocated square footage rather than welcomed into a family. Ashley," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "where is our money?" "I'm sorry?" "The $660,000 from our house. Marcus said you invested it. Where is it?" A pause. "Well, that's really between Marcus and your financial advisor." "We don't have a financial advisor. We have our son, who apparently gave our life savings to his wife to gamble with. So I'm asking you directly, where is our money?" "Mrs. Washington, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. These aren't gambles. They're strategic investments in sectors that my family has been involved with for decades. Renewable energy, biotechnology, emerging markets. How much is left? It's not about how much is left. Money doesn't just sit in a bank account when it's being invested properly. It's working, growing, generating returns. Ashley, how much money could we access right now if we needed it?" Another longer pause. "I'd have to check with the portfolio manager." Translation: it was gone. All of it. $660,000, the entire value of our home, our security, our future, was gone. Probably spent on Ashley's business expenses, her shopping trips, her investment fantasies, and our son, our Marcus, had handed it over without a second thought. Chapter 6. The guest house moving day was September 15th, 2022. I remember the date so clearly because it felt like a death, the death of the life Jerome and I had built together. The movers Marcus hired were efficient and impersonal. They wrapped our belongings in paper and bubble wrap, loaded them into trucks, and transported our entire existence to Mill Valley in less than 6 hours. What had taken us 31 years to accumulate and arrange and make into a home was reduced to boxes and labels and inventory lists. Jerome and I followed the moving truck in our old Honda, driving the 45 minutes from Richmond to Mill Valley in complete silence. The contrast between the neighborhoods was stark and deliberately symbolic. Richmond, with its working-class houses and diverse families and lived-in feel, versus Mill Valley, with its manicured lawns and expensive cars, and the kind of pristine perfection that only money can buy. Marcus and Ashley's house was beautiful in the way that magazine houses are beautiful, all clean lines and neutral colors and furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. The guest house was around back, accessible through a side gate that felt more like a servant's entrance than a family welcome. 600 square feet. Ashley had been accurate about that, though somehow seeing the space in person made it feel even smaller. 1 bedroom with barely enough room for our bed and 1 dresser. 1 bathroom with a shower so narrow Jerome could barely fit in it. A kitchenette with a tiny refrigerator, 2-burner stove, and no room for the kitchen table where we'd eaten every meal for 3 decades. A living area furnished with pieces Ashley had chosen, modern, uncomfortable furniture in shades of beige and white that showed every mark and stain. Nothing that looked like us, nothing that felt like home. "It's cozy," Ashley said brightly, standing in what she generously called the living room while the movers tried to figure out where to put our belongings. "And so private. You'll hardly know you're sharing the property." Sharing the property, not living with family. Sharing the property, like tenants or house guests overstaying their welcome. Marcus looked uncomfortable, but he was trying to maintain enthusiasm. "The kitchen's small, but you guys probably don't cook as much as you used to anyway, right?" Wrong. Cooking had always been one of my greatest pleasures, and our Sunday dinners were legendary among our friends. But there was no room for entertaining in this space, no room for the big meals that had been such an important part of our life. "Where am I supposed to put my tools?" Jerome asked, looking around the tiny space. "Oh, there's a storage unit in the back of the main garage," Ashley said. "You can keep your hobby stuff out there." Hobby stuff. Jerome's woodworking wasn't a hobby. It was his passion, his skill, his way of staying connected to the physical world as his body became less reliable. But to Ashley, it was just hobby stuff, something to be stored away out of sight. The next few hours were an exercise in heartbreak. Watching the movers try to fit our life into this tiny space was like watching someone try to pour the ocean into a teacup. Most of our furniture wouldn't fit through the door. The dining room set that had hosted every holiday meal, every birthday celebration, every important family conversation. Too big. The bookshelf that held Jerome's collection of history books and my romance novels. Too tall. The comfortable recliners where we'd watched TV and read newspapers for 20 years, too bulky for the cramped living area. "Don't worry," Marcus kept saying. "We'll find good homes for everything. Maybe some of it can go to families who really need it." Families who really need it, as if we didn't need our own belongings, our own memories, our own comfort. By evening, we were moved in the way refugees are moved into temporary housing, with the basics for survival but none of the elements that make a space feel like home. We sat on Ashley's uncomfortable beige couch, eating takeout Chinese food from paper containers because our dishes were in storage and the kitchenette had no room for proper dining. "This is going to work out great," Marcus said, though he hadn't looked either of us in the eye since the movers left. "You guys are going to love it here, and Ashley's already talking about having you over for dinner on Sundays." having us over to the main house, like guests instead of family. After Marcus and Ashley left us alone that first night, Jerome and I sat in our new reality, surrounded by boxes we had no room to unpack, wearing clothes that smelled like someone else's laundry detergent because our washer and dryer hadn't fit either. "How did we get here, Dee?" Jerome asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. 6 months earlier, we'd been homeowners with security and dignity and a future. Now we were dependents, living on our son's property at his wife's sufferance, with no money and no options and no clear path forward. That first week in the guest house was an education in humiliation. The walls were thin, so we could hear everything happening in the main house. Ashley's phone calls with her friends, her arguments with Marcus, her complaints about having us so close. "I know they're your parents," we heard her say one evening, "but this is really cramping our style. I can't even have people over without worrying about them seeing your parents shuffling around back here." Shuffling around, like we were elderly invalids instead of two people in their 50s who'd been living independently until their son decided otherwise. The kitchen situation was particularly difficult. The tiny refrigerator couldn't hold more than a day or two worth of groceries, and the 2-burner stove made cooking anything substantial nearly impossible. When I tried to make Jerome's favorite pot roast, the smell apparently wafted into the main house. "Mrs. Washington?" Ashley appeared at our door with a tight smile. "That smells delicious, but I'm wondering if you could maybe stick to lighter meals. The cooking odors are a bit overwhelming." Overwhelming. My cooking, which had fed our family and friends for decades, was now overwhelming. Marcus came by a few days later to check on us, though it felt more like a welfare visit than a family call. "How are you guys settling in?" he asked, looking around the cramped space without really seeing us. "It's fine," Jerome said, because what else could he say? "Great. And hey, I wanted to talk to you about something. Ashley and I are thinking about starting a family soon, and we might need to convert this space into a nursery eventually. But don't worry, there are some really nice senior living communities in the area. We've already started looking into options for you guys." Senior living communities. He was already planning to move us out, to shuffle us off to some institutional setting where we'd be even more isolated, even more dependent. "Marcus," I said carefully, "what happened to our money? The investment money?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated, Mom. The markets have been really volatile, and some of Ashley's family's investments hit some temporary setbacks, but they're confident things will turn around." "How much is left?" "Like I said, it's complicated. The money isn't just sitting in a bank account. It's tied up in various financial instruments." "Marcus." Jerome's voice was stern. "How much money could we access right now if we needed it?" Our son looked at the floor. "Right now? Today? Maybe 15,000? But that's just the cash portion. The real value is in the long-term investments. $15,000 out of $660,000. In less than 6 months, Ashley had managed to lose or spend 97% of our life savings. "What did she do with it?" I whispered. "It's not like that, Mom. She didn't just spend it. Her family had some cash flow issues with their businesses, and there were some investment opportunities that required quick decisions, and the renewable energy sector has been more volatile than expected." He was making excuses for her. Even now, even after she'd destroyed our financial security, he was making excuses. "Son," Jerome said quietly, "do you understand what you've done to us?" I was trying to help. I was trying to make sure you guys were taken care of. "We were taken care of," Jerome replied. "We had our own home. We had security. We had independence. And you took all of that away and gave it to a woman who threw it away like it was monopoly money." Ashley didn't throw anything away. She made strategic decisions based on expert advice. "Marcus." I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. "I need you to leave now." "Mom, you're being unfair. I'm doing my best here. I'm trying to take care of everyone, but Ashley has needs too, and her family's been really supportive of us. Get out." He left, but not before I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart even more than the financial betrayal. He wasn't sorry. He was annoyed. Annoyed that we weren't grateful for his help. Annoyed that we couldn't see how generous he was being. Annoyed that we were making his life complicated. Our son had sold our home, given our money to his wife to lose, moved us into a glorified storage unit, and he was annoyed that we weren't thanking him for it. Chapter 7. Rock Bottom. The next 6 months were the darkest period of my adult life. Jerome's health deteriorated rapidly. Whether from stress, heartbreak, or the combination of both, I couldn't say. His blood pressure spiked, his heart rhythm became irregular, and his doctor wanted to adjust his medications and run more tests. Tests that required insurance copays we couldn't afford, medications that required prescriptions. We had to choose between filling and buying groceries, doctor visits that meant asking Marcus for money, which meant enduring lectures about budgeting and lifestyle adjustments from the son who'd stolen our financial security. "Maybe you should look into Medicare supplemental insurance," Marcus suggested during one of his increasingly rare visits. "I can help you navigate the options." Navigate the options. With what money? Our Social Security payments barely covered basic living expenses, and the $15,000 that remained from our house sale was disappearing fast. Jerome started spending most of his time in bed, not because he was physically unable to get up, but because he couldn't bear to sit in the tiny living room and stare at the walls that reminded him of everything he'd lost. His workshop tools sat in the storage unit, gathering dust and rust, unused and unusable in our new reality. "I should have seen it coming," he'd say during his darker moments. "Should have protected us better." "You couldn't have known," I'd reply. But even I was starting to wonder, had there been signs we'd missed? Had Marcus been planning this longer than we realized? Had Ashley been working on him, gradually convincing him that his parents were a burden to be managed rather than people to be respected? The isolation was almost worse than the financial stress. In Richmond, we'd had neighbors who'd known us for decades, friends from church who'd watched Marcus grow up, a community where we belonged. In Mill Valley, we were invisible. The neighbors were polite but distant, clearly viewing us as temporary fixtures rather than permanent residents. Our old friends seemed to slip away gradually. It was hard to maintain relationships when you couldn't invite people over, couldn't afford to go out, couldn't even participate in the normal rhythms of social life. When people asked how we were doing, what could we say? That our son had betrayed us? That we were living like tenants in a guest house? That we'd lost everything because we'd trusted the wrong person? The shame was paralyzing. I'd worked my entire adult life to build something stable and secure, to never be a burden on anyone, to maintain my dignity and independence. Now I was dependent on a son who seemed to barely tolerate our presence and a daughter-in-law who viewed us as obstacles to her perfect life. Marcus's visits became even less frequent as winter approached. When he did stop by, the conversations were stilted and uncomfortable. He'd ask perfunctory questions about our health and our adjustment, but he never really listened to the answers. He was going through the motions of being a dutiful son while clearly wishing we'd just disappear. The breaking point came in February 2023. Jerome had another cardiac episode, not a full heart attack, but enough to require a trip to the emergency room and an overnight stay for observation. The medical bills started piling up immediately. Ambulance service, emergency room fees, cardiologist consultations, new medications. "We need to talk about Dad's healthcare costs," Marcus said when he came to visit Jerome in the hospital. "These bills are getting out of hand." Out of hand, as if Jerome had chosen to have heart problems for the inconvenience it caused everyone else. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Well, there are county programs for low-income seniors. You guys might qualify for assistance now that your financial situation has changed." Low-income seniors, county assistance. This from the son whose inheritance would have been that house. that security, that foundation we'd built over 30 years. Our financial situation changed because you gave our money to your wife, Jerome said from his hospital bed, his voice weak but angry. Dad, we've been over this. The investments weren't Ashley's fault. Market conditions, global economic factors. Stop. I couldn't listen to any more excuses. Just stop, Marcus. Mom, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to find solutions. The solution was not selling our house in the first place. The solution was not giving our money to someone who had no idea what she was doing. The solution was treating us like human beings instead of problems to be solved. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Maybe this is for the best. Maybe you guys needed to downsize anyway. Maybe you were living beyond your means. Living beyond our means. We'd bought a modest house in a working-class neighborhood and paid it off over 30 years. We'd saved every penny, made every sacrifice, lived carefully and frugally our entire adult lives, and our son thought we'd been living beyond our means. Get out, Jerome whispered. Dad, I didn't mean... Get out of this room. Get out of this hospital. Get out of our lives. Marcus left, but not before I saw that same flash of annoyance in his eyes. Even in that hospital room, with his father hooked up to heart monitors and struggling with medical bills we couldn't afford, Marcus was annoyed that we weren't grateful for his efforts to help us. That night, sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair next to Jerome's bed, I made a decision. We couldn't continue living this way. We couldn't continue being dependent on a son who clearly resented our existence and a daughter-in-law who viewed us as unwanted house guests. We had to find another way, even if it meant starting over at 55 and 57 years old, even if it meant admitting that we'd lost everything, even if it meant swallowing our pride and asking for help from people who weren't family, because the people who were supposed to be family had already abandoned us in every way that mattered. Chapter 8. Finding Strength. The social worker at the hospital was a kind woman named Maria Santos, who'd seen enough family financial crises to recognize the signs. When I explained our situation, carefully, without mentioning how we'd ended up homeless at our age, she didn't judge or lecture. She just listened and then pulled out a folder full of resources. There are options, she said simply. It's going to take some work and it's going to require you to advocate for yourselves. But there are options. Senior housing assistance, Medicaid applications, food assistance programs, job training services for older workers. None of it was what Jerome and I had imagined for this stage of our lives, but all of it was better than continuing to live as unwanted guests in our son's backyard. The hardest part, Maria warned, is going to be the waiting lists. Most of the good senior housing has long waiting lists. You might need to find temporary housing while you wait. Temporary housing. We'd thought the guest house was temporary, but temporary compared to what? Compared to the street? Compared to a homeless shelter? How long are the waiting lists typically? I asked. 6 months to 2 years, depending on the program and your income level. 6 months to 2 years. We'd have to survive in that guest house, dependent on Marcus and Ashley's questionable generosity, for potentially 2 more years. But at least now we had a plan. At least now we had something to work toward besides simply enduring each day. I started the application process immediately. The paperwork was overwhelming. Forms for housing assistance, Medicaid applications, food stamp eligibility, utility assistance programs. Each form required documentation we didn't have easy access to. Bank statements, tax returns, proof of income, medical records. I need copies of our financial documents, I told Marcus during his next visit, for the assistance applications. What kind of assistance? He asked, and I could hear the judgment in his voice. Housing assistance. Healthcare assistance, the kind of assistance people need when they don't have any money. Mom, you don't need to apply for welfare. Ashley and I are taking care of you. Taking care of us? Jerome's voice was sharp. Is that what you call this? You have a roof over your heads, you're close to family, your basic needs are met. Our basic needs, I said slowly, include dignity, independence, and security, none of which we have here. Marcus looked genuinely confused by this. But you're safe here. You don't have to worry about anything. We worry about everything, Jerome said. We worry about becoming more of a burden than we already are. We worry about what happens when Ashley decides she's tired of having us around. We worry about what happens when you decide to start that family and need this space. We worry about what happens if you and Ashley get divorced and we're left with nowhere to go. That's not going to happen, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. The applications took months to process, and during that time, our relationship with Marcus and Ashley deteriorated further. Ashley stopped pretending to be polite, making it clear that our presence was an inconvenience she barely tolerated. I really think you should consider that senior community I mentioned, she said to me one day when I was trying to tend a small container garden I'd started outside the guest house. They have activities, and you'd be around people your own age. People my own age. I was 55 years old, not 85. I wasn't ready to be warehoused with people my own age, like I was past the point of having anything to contribute to the world. I'm not interested in senior communities right now, I said. Well, you should be thinking about the future. I mean, what happens when Jerome's health gets worse? What happens when you can't take care of him anymore? These places have medical staff, support services. She was planning our obsolescence, deciding how and when we'd be disposed of for maximum convenience to her household. Ashley, I said, putting down my gardening tools and looking directly at her, where is our money? I've told you it's in investments. No, where is our money? The $60,000 from our house. Did you spend it on your business? Did you give it to your family? Did you buy things with it? I want to know exactly where our life savings went. Ashley's perfect composure cracked slightly. I don't think this is an appropriate conversation to have with me. You should talk to Marcus about financial matters. I'm talking to you because you're the one who lost it. Marcus gave it to you and you lost it. So I'm asking you directly, what did you do with our money? I made investment decisions based on expert advice. If you don't understand how sophisticated financial planning works, I understand that we gave you $660,000 and now we have $15,000. I understand that you took our security, our independence, and our future and gambled it away. What I don't understand is why my son let you do it. Ashley straightened up, and for a moment I saw the real person beneath the perfect facade, cold, entitled, and absolutely without remorse. Your son understands that sometimes you have to take risks to build real wealth. Your house was just sitting there, appreciating slowly, not generating any real returns. We put that money to work in ways that could have made you truly wealthy instead of just comfortable. Just comfortable. Our paid-off home, our security, our peace of mind was just comfortable to someone who'd been handed wealth and never had to struggle for anything. And when those investments failed, they haven't failed. They're long-term strategies. You can't expect immediate returns on serious investments. She actually believed this, or had convinced herself she believed it. Either way, she felt no responsibility for what she'd done to us. That night, I told Jerome about the conversation. She's never going to admit what she did, he said, and Marcus is never going to hold her accountable for it. I know. So what do? We save ourselves, I said, because no one else is going to. Chapter 9, The Escape Plan. By May 2023, I'd filled out more forms than I'd ever imagined existed. The bureaucracy of poverty is overwhelming. Every program has different requirements, different deadlines, different documentation needs. But slowly, gradually, things began to fall into place. Jerome and I qualified for Medicaid, which would help with his medical expenses. We qualified for food assistance, which would help stretch our meager resources. Most importantly, we were approved for senior housing assistance and placed on waiting lists for several programs. The good news, said Janet Miller, our caseworker, is that your income is low enough to qualify for emergency placement if something becomes available. The bad news is that we don't know when something will become available. Emergency placement. That's what our lives had been reduced to, an emergency to be managed by social services. But Janet had more news. There's a transitional housing program specifically for seniors who've experienced sudden housing loss. It's not permanent, but it could bridge you to permanent placement. Would you be interested in learning more? Transitional housing. It sounded institutional and depressing, but it also sounded like independence. It sounded like dignity. It sounded like escape from the guest house and Ashley's barely concealed contempt. Tell me more, I said. The program was run by a nonprofit called Second Chances Senior Services. They provided furnished studio apartments for seniors in housing crisis, along with case management services to help people navigate the complex process of finding permanent housing. The apartments are small, Janet warned, but they're private. You'd have your own space, your own kitchen, your own bathroom. No shared facilities, no curfews, no restrictions beyond keeping the place clean and not disturbing other residents. It sounded like paradise compared to the guest house. What's the catch? Jerome asked when I told him about the program. 6-month maximum stay. After that, we have to have found permanent housing or they'll help us transition to another temporary program. 6 months to find a place we can afford on Social Security. 6 months of freedom from Marcus and Ashley, I countered. 6 months to figure out our next step without feeling like unwelcome house guests. Jerome was quiet for a long moment. Do it, he said finally. Apply for it. I can't live like this anymore, Dee. I can't pretend to be grateful for this situation one more day. The application process for Second Chances was more humane than the government programs had been. Instead of just forms and documentation, there was an interview with a counselor who actually listened to our story, who understood the difference between people who'd made poor choices and people who'd been betrayed by someone they trusted. Unfortunately, family financial abuse is more common than people realize, said Linda Chen, the program coordinator. Adult children who take advantage of their parents' trust and resources. You're not the first family we've seen in this situation, and you won't be the last. Family financial abuse. There was a name for what Marcus had done to us. There were other people who'd experienced the same betrayal. We weren't alone in this, and we weren't crazy for feeling destroyed by it. The good news, Linda continued, is that you're both still relatively young and healthy. You have time to rebuild. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Rebuild. At 55 and 57, we were going to have to rebuild our entire lives from scratch. But at least we'd be rebuilding on our own terms, in our own space, with our own dignity intact. We were approved for the program and given a move-in date of June 15th, 2023. 1 year after Marcus had sold our house, we'd finally be moving toward independence again. The hardest part was telling Marcus. I'd been putting off the conversation, partly because I dreaded his reaction, and partly because I wasn't sure how he'd take the news that we were leaving his generous hospitality. You're moving into senior housing? He said, and I couldn't tell if the emotion in his voice was relief or disappointment. Mom, you don't have to do that. We're working things out here. Ashley's been talking about renovating the guest house, making it more comfortable for you guys. More comfortable. After almost a year of making it clear that we were unwelcome, now Ashley wanted to renovate for our comfort? We've already been approved for the program, I said. We're moving on June 15th. But what if you need help? What if Dad has another heart episode? What if you can't manage on your own? Now he was worried about our ability to manage on our own. Where had this concern been when he'd stolen our house and our security? We'll manage the same way we managed for 30 years before you decided we needed your help, Jerome said dryly. Marcus looked hurt, which would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. He'd betrayed us in the most fundamental way possible, but somehow we were the ones being unreasonable for wanting to leave. I don't understand why you're so angry, he said. I've been trying to take care of you. I've been trying to do the right thing. The right thing. Selling our house without our knowledge was the right thing. Giving our money to his wife to lose was the right thing. Treating us like elderly charity cases was the right thing. Marcus, I said carefully, do you honestly believe you've done the right thing by us? Yes, I saved you from having to worry about home maintenance and property taxes and all that stress. I made sure you had a place to live where you'd be safe and close to family. I've been covering your expenses when you needed help. You've been covering our expenses with our own money, Jerome pointed out. The money you let Ashley lose. The investments aren't lost. They're just not liquid right now. Stop, I said. Just stop with the lies about investments. Ashley spent our money, maybe on her business, maybe on her family's debts, maybe on shopping sprees. But it's gone, and you know it's gone, and pretending otherwise is insulting to all of us. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that shocked me. Even if that's true, even if the money is really gone, I still did the right thing. You guys were sitting on all that equity, not doing anything productive with it. At least we tried to make it grow. At least we tried. Our life savings, our security, our future, and his attitude was, at least we tried. Get out, Jerome said quietly. Dad, get out of our temporary home that you've grudgingly provided while we wait to move into senior housing because you destroyed our lives. Get out and don't come back until you're ready to admit what you've done to us. Marcus left, but not before delivering one final insult. I hope you're happy, he said from the doorway. I hope living in some institutional housing with a bunch of strangers makes you feel better about yourselves. After he was gone, Jerome and I sat in that tiny living room, surrounded by boxes we'd never fully unpacked because there was nowhere to put anything, and felt something we hadn't felt in almost a year. Hope. In 3 weeks, we'd have our own space again, our own kitchen, our own bathroom, our own front door that we could close and lock. It wouldn't be the home we'd lost, but it would be ours in ways that the guest house had never been. We were going to survive this. We were going to rebuild. And we were going to do it without Marcus's help. Chapter 10. A new beginning. Moving day came with mixed emotions. Relief at leaving the guest house, excitement about having our own space again, but also sadness that our relationship with Marcus had deteriorated so completely. As Jerome and I packed our few belongings, most of our furniture still wouldn't fit in the new studio apartment. I kept hoping Marcus would come by to say goodbye, to apologize, to somehow acknowledge what he'd put us through. He didn't. Ashley did stop by, though, with what she probably thought was a gracious gesture. I brought you some housewarming gifts for your new place, she said, holding a bag from an expensive home goods store. Some candles, a throw blanket, some nice soap. I thought it might help make the space more homey. Homey. As if scented candles could make up for the home her husband had stolen from us. That's very thoughtful, I said, because what else could I say? She was trying, in her own oblivious way, to be kind. I hope you'll be happy there, she continued, and I hope you know that we were really trying to help. Marcus loves you so much, and he just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Taken care of. There was that phrase again, the one that made us sound like elderly pets instead of human beings with dignity and agency. Ashley, I said, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to give me an honest answer. She looked nervous. Okay. Do you understand why we're angry? Do you understand what the situation has cost us? She was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe, finally, she was going to show some awareness of the damage she'd caused. I understand that you're disappointed about the investment returns, she said finally, and I understand that living here has been an adjustment. But honestly, Mrs. Washington, I think you're making this harder than it needs to be. Change is always difficult, but sometimes it's necessary. Disappointed about investment returns. That's how she saw it. not as the destruction of our life savings, our security, our future, but as disappointment about investment returns. "Goodbye, Ashley," I said, taking her bag of guilt gifts. "Thank you for these." She left looking confused, probably wondering why we couldn't just be grateful for her efforts to help us adjust to our new circumstances. The studio apartment at Second Chances was small, barely 400 square feet, but it felt like a mansion compared to the guest house. Our own front door with our own key, a kitchenette that was actually ours to use without worrying about cooking odors bothering anyone, a bathroom where we could shower without feeling like we were imposing on someone's generosity. Most importantly, it felt like ours. Temporary, yes, but ours. Jerome set up his small TV in the corner and claimed the one comfortable chair. I arranged what remained of our belongings, photo albums, a few books, some kitchen items we'd managed to save, and for the first time in almost a year, felt like I was home. "It's not much," Jerome said, looking around the tiny space. "It's everything," I replied. "It's privacy. It's dignity. It's ours." The first night in our own place, we sat together watching the evening news and eating dinner at our own small table, and I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The case management services at Second Chances were invaluable. Linda Chen helped us navigate the complex process of applying for permanent housing, but more than that, she helped us start to see a future beyond just survival. "Have you thought about working again?" she asked during one of our weekly meetings. "I know you're both in your 50s, which can make job hunting challenging, but there are programs specifically designed to help older workers find employment." Working again. I hadn't even considered it a possibility. In my mind, we were senior citizens now, people to be taken care of rather than people with something to contribute. "What kind of work?" Jerome asked. "Well, what did you do before you retired?" "I worked in construction until my heart problems. Denise cleaned offices and worked in retail." There are opportunities in both those fields, especially for experienced workers. Maybe not the same physical demands Jerome used to handle, but related work. And Denise, there's a real need for experienced workers in the service industry. The idea of working again was both terrifying and exciting. Terrifying because we'd been out of the workforce for years, because we were older now, because the job market had changed. But exciting because it represented independence, dignity, the possibility of building something again instead of just surviving on assistance. We started slowly. Jerome found part-time work with a small construction company doing estimates and project planning, using his experience without the physical demands his heart couldn't handle anymore. I got a job working at a grocery store, stocking shelves and helping customers, work that felt familiar and manageable. The paychecks were small, but they were ours. Combined with our Social Security and the affordable rent at Second Chances, we were actually making it work. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't destitute either. More importantly, we felt useful again, productive, like we had something to contribute to the world beyond being problems to be solved. Marcus called a few times during those first months. Awkward conversations where he'd ask how we were doing, and I'd give polite, distant answers. He never apologized. He never acknowledged what he'd done to us. He just seemed to be waiting for us to get over our disappointment and welcome him back into our lives. "Are you coming for Thanksgiving?" he asked during one October call. "We have other plans," I said, though we didn't really. "What other plans?" "Mom, we're family. We should spend the holidays together." Family. He still thought we were family despite everything he'd done to us, as if family was just a biological fact rather than a relationship built on trust, respect, and love. "Marcus," I said carefully, "we're not ready to spend holidays with you yet. When will you be ready? When you're ready to admit what you did to us and apologize for it." "I've already told you I was trying to help." I hung up. Jerome and I spent Thanksgiving at the community center where Second Chances hosted a dinner for residents and their families. It wasn't the Thanksgiving we'd imagined for this stage of our lives, but it was warm and friendly and filled with people who understood what it meant to start over later in life. By December, we'd been approved for permanent housing, a one-bedroom apartment in a senior community that wasn't institutional but wasn't expensive either. It would be our home for as long as we wanted it, with rent we could afford on our combined income and Social Security. We were going to be okay. Not wealthy, not secure in the way we'd once been, but okay. Independent, dignified, free. Chapter 11. The Return. I should have known Marcus wouldn't stay away forever. I should have expected that eventually. His pride or his guilt or his circumstances would bring him back to our door. But when it happened, when he showed up at our new apartment in February 2024 with 2 suitcases and tears in his eyes, I was completely unprepared. Jerome was at work. He'd been promoted to supervisor at the construction company and was putting in longer hours when I heard the knock on our door. Through the peephole, I saw my son standing in the hallway looking like he'd aged 5 years in the 8 months since we'd last seen him. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can I come in?" He looked terrible. His expensive clothes were wrinkled and ill-fitting, his hair was unkempt, and his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, or tears, or both. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping aside to let him in. "Ashley left me," he said simply, and then he broke down completely. I watched my son, my 32-year-old son who'd betrayed us in the most fundamental way possible, cry like a child in our tiny living room, and despite everything he'd done to us, my heart broke for him. "When?" I asked. 3 weeks ago. She moved in with her personal trainer. Apparently they've been seeing each other for months. I guided him to our small couch and sat down beside him, muscle memory taking over the way it does when your child is hurting, even when that child has hurt you. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I was sorry he was in pain. "The divorce papers came yesterday," he continued. "She's asking for alimony and she wants half of everything, and Mom, there's nothing left. The house is mortgaged to the hilt because of the investment loans, and my savings are gone, and I don't know what to do." Investment loans. That was a new detail. "What investment loans?" Marcus wiped his eyes and looked at me with the kind of shame I'd never seen on his face before. After the investments didn't work out the way Ashley's family promised, we took out loans against our house to try to make up the difference. Ashley said her dad had a guaranteed return opportunity, something that would definitely work this time. The irony wasn't lost on me. He destroyed our financial security chasing his wife's investment fantasies, and then she destroyed his security the same way. "So now you're homeless too," I said quietly. "I know I have no right to ask," Marcus said, looking down at his hands. "I know what I did to you and Dad was unforgivable, but I have nowhere else to go, and I finally understand what I put you through. I understand what it feels like to lose everything because you trusted the wrong person." I looked at my son, broken, humbled, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done to us, and felt the weight of a decision that would define the rest of our relationship. Jerome came home an hour later to find Marcus asleep on our couch, looking smaller and younger than I'd seen him since he was a teenager. "What's he doing here?" Jerome asked, his voice carefully neutral. I told him everything Marcus had told me, about Ashley's affair, about the divorce, about the loans and the foreclosure, and the complete financial ruin that mirrored what we'd experienced. "And he wants to stay here," Jerome said. It wasn't a question. He's got nowhere else to go. Jerome was quiet for a long moment, looking at our sleeping son. 1 month, he said finally. He can stay for 1 month while he figures out his next step. But he pays rent, whatever he can afford from whatever job he finds. And he apologizes, really apologizes, not just sorry he got caught up in his own mess. When Marcus woke up, I told him Jerome's conditions. He nodded eagerly. desperate and grateful in a way that reminded me of us begging for assistance programs just 2 years earlier. "I'll get a job immediately," he promised. "Any job. And Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I was selfish and stupid, and I thought I knew better than you, and I destroyed the most important thing you'd ever built. I can't undo what I did, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. It was acknowledgement. It was the son we'd raised finally remembering the values we'd taught him. Epilogue, full circle. 6 months later, Marcus is still living with us. He found work as a junior financial advisor, ironic considering his track record, and he gives us half his paycheck in rent and expenses. The other half he's saving, slowly and carefully, the way Jerome and I taught him to save before Ashley convinced him that money was for spending and investing and impressing people. He's dating again, a teacher named Sarah who drives a 10-year-old Honda and thinks takeout pizza is a fancy dinner. She's kind and sensible and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. Jerome and I like her. Ashley remarried 6 months after her divorce was finalized. Her new husband is a venture capitalist with family money and a prenup that protects his assets from her investment fantasies. Marcus dodged a bullet, though it took losing everything for him to realize it. We never got our house back. The family who bought it loves it the way we did, and they've painted the kitchen yellow and planted roses in the front yard. Sometimes I drive by and feel a pang of loss, but mostly I feel peace. That house was part of our past, not our future. Our apartment isn't the foundation Jerome and I built together, but it's something we've built too, a life of independence and dignity and carefully earned security. We're not wealthy, but we're stable. We're not young, but we're not old either. We have time to rebuild, and now we have our son back to help us do it. Marcus hasn't fully forgiven himself yet, and Jerome and I haven't fully forgiven him either. But we're family, and family doesn't just mean loving someone when they deserve it. Sometimes it means loving them through their worst mistakes and helping them find their way back to who they're supposed to be. The foundation we thought we'd lost wasn't really the house after all. It was the values, the love, the commitment to each other that survives even the worst betrayals. It's taken us 3 years to understand that, but now we're building again, together, carefully, one day at a time, and this time we're building something that can't be sold out from under us.